In an empty golf course at dusk, Michael Jordan and Steph Curry walked side by side, away from the spotlight. What began as a casual encounter transformed into the most important conversation that no camera ever captured. A life lesson passed from one legend to another that would forever change how Curry viewed his own legacy. The September sun slowly descended over Whistling Straits, Wisconsin, painting the sky with a palette of orange and red that seemed reserved only for postcards. The crowd that had followed the Ryder Cup throughout the day had dispersed. Only distant staff remained, and the occasional hum of a golf cart crossing the horizon. It was in this almost cinematic setting that Steph Curry spotted the unmistakable silhouette of Michael Jordan. It was difficult to mistake that figure. Even from behind, even after all these years, there was something in Jordan's posture that conveyed authority. He walked alone along the fairway of the 18th hole, hands in pockets, at a contemplative pace that contrasted with the intensity the world associated with him. He wore light pants and a navy blue polo shirt that swayed slightly with the breeze from Lake Michigan. Curry felt that familiar hesitation, the same he had experienced at 9 years old when he first saw Jordan in Charlotte. The difference was that now he too was a name, also carried trophies, also knew what it was like to redefine a sport. But before Jordan, part of him was still that wide-eyed boy from North Carolina. Should I or shouldn't I? The question echoed in his mind for a few seconds before his feet made the decision for him. Curry quickened his pace, enough to shorten the distance, but not so much that he seemed eager. He adjusted his warrior's cap, an unconscious habit when nervous, and cleared his throat as he approached. "Mr. Jordan?" The legendary figure turned, his eyes analyzing Curry with that intensity that had intimidated opponents for decades. Then, a recognition. Not a complete smile. Jordan rarely offered them freely, but a slight raising of the corner of his lips, an almost imperceptible nod. "Steph." It wasn't a question, just a statement. "Good to see you off the court." A handshake, firm, but without the veiled competition that often accompanied these meetings between elite athletes. Curry noticed the details. Jordan's hand, larger than his, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes that TV cameras usually didn't capture. The discreet but unmistakably exclusive gold watch. "May I join you?" asked Curry, with an external confidence that masked the slight tremor in his voice. Jordan gestured with his head toward the path ahead. "Sure, I was just thinking." They began walking side by side. Silence immediately settled. Not exactly uncomfortable, but laden with an indefinable weight. It was the kind of silence that exists when two people who know each other through stories, statistics, and legends finally share the same physical space. On the horizon, the Ryder Cup flags fluttered gently. Curry looked discreetly at the man beside him. Jordan had that aura that transcended basketball, something that Curry, even with all his records and rings, still wondered if he would ever be able to emanate. It was as if Jordan existed on a different frequency, one where the air around him seemed denser, more significant. Curry broke the silence first. "The course looks amazing today." "Yes," replied Jordan, looking at the horizon. "Whistling Straits has always been special to me. There's something about this place. The way the wind comes off the lake makes you present in the moment." A few more steps in silence. A bird crossed the sky. A stronger breeze brought the smell of freshly cut grass and the distant, salty aroma of the lake. "Do you play much golf these days?" asked Jordan, his deep voice contrasting with the silence around them. "When the season allows. Not as much as I'd like," replied Curry, aware that he was now walking alongside the man whose posters had decorated his childhood bedroom. the same man whose moves he imitated in his backyard until nightfall, while his father Dell watched with a smile. They passed a wooden bench, strategically positioned with a view of the lake. Jordan showed no interest in sitting, so they continued walking. Silence returned, but now with a different quality, as if both were calibrating themselves, finding the right tone for a conversation they didn't yet know they would have. Curry observed how Jordan looked at the course, not like a tourist admiring the landscape, but like someone reading a familiar book, recognizing each curve and obstacle, each sand trap and undulation of the green. There was an almost reverential respect in his observation. "You know," Jordan finally said, "I come here whenever I can before tournaments start, when there's still no one around. Helps clear my mind." Curry nodded, feeling that he had received a small piece of a larger puzzle. "I understand that. I have my rituals too. Arriving hours early at the gym, feeling the space." Another nod from Jordan, this time with a fleeting gleam in his eyes that suggested recognition. There was something they both shared, the need to commune with the spaces that defined their lives before they were filled with the noise and expectations of the outside world. The golden light of the setting sun now bathed the entire field, creating elongated shadows that followed the two men like a silent procession. It was one of those rare moments when time seemed simultaneously accelerated and in slow motion, as if the universe recognized the uniqueness of the meeting between two generations of greatness. A distant staff member recognized the two and stopped, clearly debating whether to approach for a photo. Jordan noticed and subtly directed his walk away, towards a more isolated area of the course. Curry understood the movement without words being necessary. This was another shared element of their lives, the constant negotiation between being a public figure and preserving moments of genuine humanity. "They never really leave you alone, do they?" commented Curry, with an understanding smile. Jordan's eyes met his, and for the first time, Curry saw something beyond the legend. He saw a man who understood, perhaps better than anyone else, the existence he led. There was no verbal response, just an almost imperceptible sigh that carried decades of life under the spotlight. Silence returned, but now it was a shared silence. Like experienced musicians who know the value of the pause between notes, they allowed the moment to breathe on its own. And so it was, on that golf course in Wisconsin, as day gave way to night, that two of the greatest players basketball has ever known walked side by side, united by the silence that precedes conversations that truly matter. The sky was beginning to change from a deep orange to shades of purple when Jordan subtly diverted the path toward a more elevated area of the course. From there, the view opened to the vast Lake Michigan on one side and the meticulously designed undulations of Whistling Straits on the other. The first stars were already appearing timidly on the horizon. "Your handicap has improved since the American Century at Tahoe," Jordan commented casually, breaking the silence. It wasn't a question, but a precise observation. Curry raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You follow my golf game?" "I follow many things," Jordan replied with a half-smile. "The swing is more consistent, more confident." "I've been working on it during the summers," explained Curry, feeling strangely validated by the comment. "Basketball consumes so much that golf has become, I don't know, an escape valve." Jordan nodded slowly, as if weighing his next words. "Every great player needs an escape valve, Steph. Something that isn't about records, contracts, or what commentators are saying about you that week." There was something in the way Jordan spoke, a vulnerability rarely associated with the man who personified unbreakable competitive confidence. that created space for a different, deeper conversation. "How did you deal with it?" Curry asked after a brief silence. "Being Michael Jordan. Every day. Always." Jordan stopped walking for a moment and looked at the landscape. The twilight embraced the golf course, softening its contours. "You create a public version," he finally answered. "Michael Jordan, the basketball player. An armor. But underneath..." He made a significant pause. "Underneath, you're still just a guy trying to make shots, win games, do your job. Except, no one wants to hear that." Curry watched him attentively, realizing that he was witnessing a side of Jordan that cameras never captured. "Sometimes I wonder if it's me playing basketball, or if it's the Steph Curry that others expect to see," he confessed, feeling a strange freedom in verbalizing such an intimate thought. Jordan's face lit up with immediate recognition. "So, you feel it too?" It wasn't a question, but a statement, the kind of understanding that could only exist between people who had lived truly comparable experiences. They resumed walking, now at an even slower pace, as if the conversation demanded its own cadence. "In the finals against Cleveland in 2016, Curry began, his voice slightly lower, "when we lost after being up 3-1, it was like I had failed an expectation that I didn't even know existed, as if I was disappointing not just the fans, but some mythical version of myself." Jordan listened attentively, his face a mask of concentration. 1995. "I came back mid-season. We lost to Orlando in the conference semifinals. Shaq and Penny. I wasn't myself yet." "But you came back the next year and started another three-peat," observed Curry. "Yes, because that loss consumed me." Jordan's face hardened momentarily, his eyes focused on some distant point, as if reliving those moments. "I trained like never before that summer. I was in the gym when others were sleeping, on the Space Jam set during the day, training at night. That loss gave me fuel." Curry nodded, recognizing the same impulse in himself. After the 2016 defeat, he had channeled that pain into a renewed determination that eventually resulted in 2 more championships. "What no one tells you," continued Jordan, his voice now lower, almost confessional, "is about the weight you carry. Not just the weight of winning, but the weight of being. A symbol, a face on billboards, a walking expectation." The words touched something deep in Curry. How many times had he felt exactly that? The invisible weight of representing not just a team, but a revolution in playing style, an entire era of the sport. "In Chicago, I was the guy everyone expected to save the game, make the decisive shot, be perfect," Jordan continued. His, normally controlled face now showed subtle signs of emotion, a tension around the eyes, a slight contraction of the lips. "And then, with the Wizards..." He left the sentence unfinished, but it wasn't necessary to complete it. The years in Washington had been a complicated epilogue to the perfect narrative that was Jordan's career. No longer the dominant athlete, no longer invincible. "In those years in D.C., I learned something that would have been useful to know before," said Jordan, looking directly at Curry. "That the game moves on, that new faces emerge, and that trying to hold on to what you were is a game you can't win." The twilight had deepened, and the automatic lights of the course began to turn on along the paths, creating a dramatic contrast between light and shadow on both their faces. "How did you deal with criticism?" asked Curry, "especially when it seemed personal." An enigmatic smile appeared on Jordan's face. "I turned it into fuel. Every doubt, every negative. comment all went into the furnace that heated my determination. His expression changed subtly, but it took its toll on relationships, on peace of mind. My wife, Isha, says that sometimes I bring Steph Curry from the court home, confessed Curry, with an uncomfortable smile. That competitive intensity, that need to prove something. Jordan let out a short, genuine laugh. Juanita used to say the same thing, that I treated discussions about who would wash the dishes like it was Game 7 of the finals. Both laughed, a moment of shared lightness that quickly gave way to more serious reflection. The hardest part, continued Jordan, his voice now loaded with hard-won wisdom, is separating what others expect from you from what you really want for yourself. In Chicago, those two things were perfectly aligned. I wanted to win. The city wanted me to win. Simple. He paused, his profile silhouetted against the increasingly dark horizon. But what about when they're not aligned? When what the world expects from you is no longer what you have to offer? Or what you want to offer? Curry felt the weight of that question. At 33, at the peak of his career, such questions still seemed distant. But he knew that one day he would face them. With the Warriors, we had those magical moments. Curry hesitated, searching for the right words. 5 consecutive finals. 3 titles. It was like we were riding a perfect wave. And then, Kevin left. Clay got hurt. The EPE world moved on, completed Jordan, demonstrating a detailed knowledge of Curry's recent trajectory. Exactly. And suddenly, we were at rock bottom, from best team to worst record in the league in one season. Jordan nodded slowly. And how did you handle that? When the world was used to seeing Steph Curry lifting trophies, and suddenly you were losing night after night? The question wasn't just curiosity. There was a genuine search for understanding, as if Jordan was interested not just in sharing his own experience, but in understanding Curry's as well. It was strange, admitted Curry, carefully choosing his words, as if I were performing on the same stage, but for an audience that expected a completely different show. Some questioned if I was still relevant. Jordan's eyebrows raised slightly. Relevant? You? Memory is short in this game, replied Curry with a shrug. Especially now, with social media, new players emerging. And how did that make you feel? Asked Jordan, his voice devoid of the judgment that Curry might have expected. Honestly, anger, then determination, then a kind of clarity. Curry looked at the horizon, now almost completely dark except for the reddish line where the sun had set. I realized that I was carrying the burden of proving something constantly, even after everything I had achieved. Jordan remained silent for a moment, absorbing the words. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience. That's the invisible burden, Steph, the one no one sees, the one you carry when you enter any room, court, or golf course. He gestured broadly, indicating the space around them. It's the price of excellence. It's the cost of having changed the game. Curry realized that he was receiving something rare, not just Michael Jordan's attention, but his vulnerability. The recognition of a shared struggle that transcended generations, playing styles and personalities. How did you find balance? Asked Curry, his voice betraying a sincere curiosity. Jordan let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of introspection. Who said I found it? The comment hung between them like an unexpected confession, too sincere to be dismissed, too complex to be resolved in a single conversation. As they continued their walk, Now toward a small grove that separated the practice fields from the club headquarters, Curry felt that something had changed in the air between them. The generational gap, the incessant comparisons made by the media, the different eras, all of this seemed less important now. What remained were two people dealing with different versions of the same invisible burden, a weight that could only be truly understood by those who had carried it. The small grove offered a natural barrier against the wind that was beginning to blow stronger from the lake. The trees created a natural corridor that led them to a more reserved area of the course, where a solitary wooden bench was strategically positioned with a view of the lake and the now star-studded horizon. The location seemed to have been deliberately designed for contemplation, isolated enough for private conversations, but positioned to capture the natural beauty of Wisconsin. Jordan gestured toward the bench. "Shall we sit for a moment?" Curry nodded, recognizing that the conversation had reached a point where both preferred the stability of the seat to the restlessness of continuous movement. They sat side by side, not excessively close, but close enough for the conversation to flow naturally in lower and more confidential voices. Silence returned briefly, but now with a different quality. It was no longer the uncomfortable silence of strangers, but the reflective pause between men who were beginning to recognize common ground in experiences that very few people on the planet could truly understand. "You know what's strange?" Curry finally said, looking at the dark horizon where the lake met the night sky. "When we won the first championship in 2015, it was euphoric, exactly as I had dreamed. Like we had reached the top of the mountain after years of climbing." Jordan watched attentively as Curry continued. "But then came 2017, then 2018, more rings, more celebrations." Curry paused, searching for the right words. And each time, the celebration was a little shorter. The satisfaction lasted less time. Jordan nodded almost, imperceptibly, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if perfectly recognizing the phenomenon that Curry was describing. After the third title, I remember being in the locker room, champagne everywhere, everyone shouting, celebrating. Curry shook his head, remembering, and for a brief moment, I caught myself thinking, is this all? The confession hung between them, heavy with the implicit guilt of not feeling the gratitude he thought he should feel, of not experiencing the fullness that the IB world presumed accompanied such achievements. "That makes you seem ungrateful, doesn't it?" Curry continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Millions of players dream of winning one championship. I have 3, and yet, you wonder why it's not enough," completed Jordan, not as criticism, but as recognition of a shared truth. Curry looked at Jordan, surprised by the precision with which he had articulated the feeling. "Exactly." Curry exhaled slowly. "At first, I thought it was just me, that there was something wrong, that I was incapable of truly appreciating what we had achieved." Jordan adjusted himself on the bench, turning slightly to face Curry more directly. The faint light from distant lamps created dramatic shadows on his face, accentuating the expression lines earned over decades of intense competition and public scrutiny. "Let me tell you something I've never said in interviews," began Jordan, his voice acquiring a confessional tone. "After the first three-peat in 1993, before my father passed away, before baseball, I was already feeling something similar." Curry watched attentively, aware that he was receiving a rare confidence. "We had just defeated Phoenix in the finals, 3 consecutive championships. I had been finals MVP 3 times in a row. We dominated the league. Jordan paused, looking at his own hands. That night, I returned to the hotel room alone, after all the celebrations, interviews, all the madness. His words were measured, calculated, as if he were revisiting an emotional territory rarely explored. I sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the finals MVP trophy, and felt nothing. Jordan looked up, meeting Curry's eyes. An emptiness, as if I were chasing something that kept moving away, no matter how many times I reached it. Curry felt a wave of relief mixed with a strange sadness. Relief at not being alone in that experience, sadness at the realization that perhaps this emptiness was a permanent condition of those who reached the pinnacles of their profession. The sports psychologists I've worked with call it post-achievement depression, commented Curry. When you pursue something with such intensity for so long, and then it's over. The goal is achieved. And suddenly, there's a vacuum where before there was purpose. Exactly, agreed Jordan. It's as if we had been programmed for the pursuit, not for the arrival. A brief silence, settled as both contemplated that uncomfortable truth. In the distance, the soft sound of lake water lapping against the shore created a melancholic soundtrack for the conversation. After the first three-peat, I felt disoriented, continued Jordan. People don't understand that it's not about ingratitude. It's about identity. When your entire existence is defined by the chase, what happens when you finally capture the prey? Curry nodded, feeling a deep resonance with the words. Did you know that after our 2018 title, I had trouble sleeping for weeks? Confessed Curry. Not because of the excitement of the victory, but because I found myself thinking, what comes next? Will I ever feel something as intense as this again? Jordan smiled, a smile that contained no joy, but recognition. The inconvenient truth that no one wants to hear, he said, lowering his voice as if sharing a dangerous secret, is that the game gives and takes. It gives you purpose, identity, adoration, but takes something too. Perhaps it's the ability to feel simple satisfaction, to be content. Curry absorbed the words, relating them to his own experiences. The nights after the great triumphs that should have brought peace, but instead brought an inexplicable restlessness. The constant need to prove something, even after having proven everything the world demanded of him. I have a fear, said Curry finally, his voice almost a whisper, as if he were verbalizing, something he barely admitted to himself. What if I never feel complete, even winning everything? What if I conquer everything possible to conquer, and still feel that something is missing? The question hung between them, laden with vulnerability. It was the kind of confession that elite athletes rarely allowed themselves, especially with each other. Jordan did not respond immediately. His gaze was lost on the horizon, where the dark sky met the even darker lake. His expression was contemplative, his lips slightly contracted, as if he were carefully evaluating the most honest answer he could offer. Seconds transformed into almost a minute of complete silence. Curry didn't press, instinctively understanding that some questions deserved the weight of silence before an answer. I can't promise you that one day you'll feel complete, Jordan finally replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience. What I can say is that, with time, you begin to understand that perhaps that's not the right question. Curry tilted his head, intrigued. What do you mean? Jordan adjusted himself on the bench, carefully choosing his words. For years, I thought the problem was in the quantity. More titles, more MVPs, more records. He gestured vaguely with his hand, as if pushing away the idea. Now I realize I was looking for fullness in the wrong place. A breeze passed by them, gently swaying the branches of nearby trees. On the horizon, a shooting star briefly streaked across the sky before disappearing. The question isn't whether you will one day feel complete by winning everything, continued Jordan. It's whether you can find meaning beyond the wins and losses that define our public career. Curry's eyes revealed complete attention, absorbing each word like a student before a master. In my early years of retirement, I continued looking for that feeling of fullness in business, in golf, in new achievements. Jordan made a significant pause. But the truth is that sensation of never enough doesn't automatically disappear when you hang up your shoes. Curry nodded, recognizing the wisdom in the words, even if it was still difficult to imagine how to apply it to his own life. "So, what really matters in the end?" he asked, his voice betraying a sincere search for direction. Jordan looked directly into Curry's eyes with an intensity that reminded of his days on the court. "I don't have all the answers, Steph. I'm still figuring it out, myself." A subtle, almost melancholic smile appeared on his face. "But I've learned that trophies collect dust. Records are broken. In the end, I think what endures are the moments that weren't captured by cameras. The people who will still be there when the lights go out." Something in Jordan's face softened, a rare vulnerability that contrasted with the public image of the relentless competitor. "And perhaps," he added, almost as an afterthought, "perhaps it's not about feeling complete. Perhaps it's about learning to live with this incompleteness, to embrace it as part of what drives us." The depth of that observation hit Curry in an unexpected way. It was, in its apparent simplicity, a perspective he had never considered. The idea that perhaps the pursuit of absolute fullness was itself a trap, an unrealistic expectation that denied the fundamentally restless nature of the human spirit. Both remained silent for a moment, each immersed in their own thoughts as the sky above them filled increasingly with stars. The wooden bench they shared had become, in those brief minutes, an unlikely confessional for two of the greatest figures basketball had ever known. A space where masks could be briefly removed, where vulnerabilities could be expressed without judgment. In Jordan's face, Curry saw something that cameras and interviews had never captured. A restless peace, if such a contradiction were possible, of someone who had learned to coexist with the same questions that now haunted Curry. And in Curry's face, Jordan recognized the reflection of his own journey. Past, present, and somehow continuous. A living reminder that some pursuits transcend generations, records, and changes in the game. A stronger gust of wind from the lake crossed the grove, causing both to instinctively adjust their positions on the bench. Jordan stretched his right leg in front of him, lightly massaging his knee with an almost unconscious movement. "Still bothers you?" asked Curry, noticing the gesture. Jordan smiled with irony. "Every day, especially when the temperature drops or when a storm is coming." He gave a light tap on his knee. "My personal barometer." Curry nodded in understanding. At 33, he already knew well the secret language of injuries, those persistent whispers of the body that the public rarely perceived. "The right ankle for me," confessed Curry. 3 severe sprains in the same joint. Doctors said I might never play at the same level." "And yet, you revolutionized the game," observed Jordan. "I was always impressed by how you built your career on a foundation that many considered fragile." Curry couldn't help but feel a wave of pride with the comment. A direct acknowledgement from Michael Jordan about his resilience was something few athletes could claim. Surgery was in 2012, continued Curry. Since then, it's a daily battle. Strengthening, mobility, prevention. Jordan nodded, his gaze distant, as if revisiting his own battles. I remember my foot in 1985-86, second year in the league. Fractured the navicular. Everyone said I had come back too soon, that I was risking my career. But you came back and scored 63 points against the Celtics in the playoffs, remembered Curry. And we still lost the game, added Jordan with a short laugh. But yes, it showed something to myself. That pain was just another opponent to be overcome. Silence settled briefly, both reflecting on the complex relationship between elite athletes and pain, physical and beyond. You know what's strange? Jordan finally broke the silence, his voice lower now. People see the injuries, the bruises, the taped ankles. It's the visible part of suffering. But there are pains that no one sees. Something in the way Jordan pronounced those words, with a vulnerability rarely associated with his public image, created a safe space for deeper confessions. Have you ever felt... Curry hesitated, searching for the right words. At your peak, when everyone saw you as invincible, as the face of the NBA, have you ever felt completely alone? Jordan didn't respond immediately. He looked at the starry sky for a moment, as if searching for something in the constellations above. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of lived experience. In 1993, before my first retirement, I was at the center of everything. 3 straight championships, global fame, record endorsement contracts. He made a significant pause. And yet, there were nights when I would sit alone in the hotel room, looking out the window, and wonder if anyone really knew me. If there was a single person in the world who saw the man beyond the uniform. Curry listened attentively, recognizing a feeling that he himself had experienced, even surrounded by family, friends, and teammates. At the beginning, you have a large circle, continued Jordan. Childhood friends, family, teammates, coaches, people you trust, but as you rise... He gestured with his hand, indicating an upward trajectory. The circle keeps shrinking. Because intentions change, completed Curry, understanding perfectly. Suddenly, you don't know if they're close to you for who you are or for what you represent. For access, for influence, for money. Jordan nodded slowly, his eyes meeting Curry's with renewed intensity. Exactly. And there comes a point where you simply stop trusting, build walls, become harder to reach. And people interpret this as arrogance, added Curry, or coldness, calculation. Jordan let out a heavy sigh, when in reality it's just protection. The wind had decreased, leaving the night air perfectly still around them. Some small animal, perhaps a rabbit or a raccoon, moved briefly in the nearby grove before disappearing into the darkness. In 2016, after the loss in the finals, began Curry, his voice, betraying a vulnerability rarely demonstrated publicly. I went to the locker room and cried, not just because of the defeat, but because I felt that I had disappointed everyone, the team, the fans, my family. He shook his head, remembering. But the worst wasn't that. It was going home and realizing that I had no one with whom I could be really fragile. Jordan watched him attentively, his face a mask of concentration. Everyone wanted to console me, tell me everything would be fine, that we would come back stronger, continued Curry. No one understood that sometimes you don't want solutions. You just want someone to be there, someone who understands the depth of the pain without trying to minimize it or fix it. Because there is no fix, completed Jordan, nodding. It's a wound that never completely closes. Decades later, I still wake up thinking about shots I missed, plays I could have done differently. Curry looked at Jordan with a new perspective. No longer the untouchable idol of his childhood, but a man who had walked through valleys similar to his own, who knew the same shadows. You know what no one ever knew? Jordan leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. The night before Game 5 of the 1997 finals against Utah, the famous flu game, I was in the hotel bathroom, vomiting, shaking with fever, crying from frustration. Curry raised his eyebrows, surprised by the revelation. Not because I was sick, continued Jordan, but because I was terrified of not being able to play, of letting my team down, of failing when everyone was counting on me. His eyes revealed a vulnerability that completely contradicted the image of the relentless competitor. I spent the whole night on the bathroom floor, alone, because I didn't want anyone, not even my closest teammates, to see me in that state. That confession deeply affected Curry. The image of Jordan, the invincible, the unshakable Michael Jordan, curled up on a bathroom floor, fighting against his own vulnerabilities, was both humanizing and disturbing. During the peak of the Bulls, continued Jordan, I developed the habit of dining alone in hotel rooms. Not always because I wanted to, but because I needed that space where it wasn't necessary to be Michael Jordan. He made air quotes while pronouncing his own name, where I could simply exist without expectations, without stares, without questions. I understand that more than you imagine, replied Curry, feeling an increasingly deep connection with Jordan's experience. People don't realize how exhausting it is to always be on, always attentive to what you say, how you act, what you wear, where you go. Like an actor who never leaves the character, added Jordan. Exactly, agreed Curry. And eventually, you begin to question where the character ends and where you yourself begin. Jordan closed his eyes briefly, as if Curry's words had touched on something deeply true. When he opened them again, there was a different gleam in them, a mixture of recognition and perhaps a touch of relief at being truly understood. The hardest decisions I made, said Jordan after a moment of silence, weren't on the court. They were deciding who to trust, who to let in, who to keep close when everything else changes around you. Curry nodded, absorbing the words. The isolation. Jordan hesitated, as if articulating something he rarely verbalized. The isolation doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual. You start to notice patterns, people who only appear when they need something, friendships that reveal themselves as transactional, and you begin to build defenses. Until one day, completed Curry, you look around and realize that you've built a fortress so impenetrable that not even you can get out anymore. Their gazes met, two men from different generations recognizing in each other the same internal battles, the same invisible scars that the public would never see, that cameras would never capture. It's scary, said Curry after a moment, how similar our experiences are, even separated by so many years and in such different contexts. Jordan smiled, not the calculated smile of interviews or commercials, but something more genuine, more rare. Maybe because the game changes, Steph, but the cost of playing it at the highest level, that remains the same. Silence returned, but now with a different quality. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence of strangers, nor the contemplative pause of new acquaintances, but the shared quietness of warriors who recognize in each other the same battles, the same victories, and the same deep wounds that never completely heal. The silence between them had acquired an almost meditative quality when Jordan suddenly stood up, extending one hand to relieve the tension in his back. "Let's walk a bit more," he suggested, nodding his head toward a path that descended gently, in the opposite direction to the one they had traveled. "There's a practice putting green not far from here. At this hour, it will be completely empty." Curry stood up, feeling the slight protest of his muscles after sitting for a while. Together, they descended along the path illuminated only by small landscaping lights that outlined the contours of the trails. The moon, almost full now, emerged from behind a passing cloud, bathing the field in an ethereal silver glow. "Did golf come after basketball for you?" asked Curry as they walked side by side. Jordan nodded. "I started playing seriously during my years with the Bulls. It was an escape valve, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts." A subtle smile appeared on his face. "Some of my teammates joked that I loved golf because it was the only sport where no one could defend me." Curry laughed, appreciating the ironic self-reflection. "What they didn't understand," Jordan continued, his tone now more serious, "is that golf gave me something basketball never could." "What?" "Wait, you'll see." After a few minutes of walking, the path opened up to a perfectly maintained putting green. The flags were only vaguely visible in the nightlight, but the immaculate surface shone under the moonlight like a pool of green velvet. Jordan walked to the edge of the green and stopped, observing the surface for a moment with eyes that seemed to evaluate every undulation, every subtle variation in texture. Without saying a word, he pulled a ball marker from his pocket and positioned it on the ground. From another pocket, he produced a golf ball, which he carefully placed on the marker. "Do you always carry that with you?" asked Curry, intrigued. "On this course? Always." Jordan then walked to a nearby bush and, to Curry's surprise, pulled out a putter that seemed to have been strategically hidden there. "I have a few hiding spots around the course, for when I need to think." There was something almost reverential in the way Jordan held the club, as if it were a natural extension of his body. He positioned himself behind the ball, adjusting his stance with a methodical precision that reminded Curry of how he himself prepared for free throws. "Basketball is reaction, instinct, explosion," said Jordan, still adjusting over the ball. "But golf?" He paused, raising the putter in a slow pendulum movement. "Golf is control. It's silence. It's you against your own thoughts." With a smooth, almost hypnotic movement, Jordan executed the putt. The ball rolled across the green in a perfect line, disappearing into a hole that Curry could barely discern in the half-light. "Impressive," commented Curry genuinely. "Now you," said Jordan, handing the putter to Curry. Curry accepted the club, feeling its weight, its balance. He studied the same line Jordan had used, placed another ball in the same position, and prepared. His stance was technically impeccable. Years of meticulous golf training had shaped his approach. "Before the stroke," Jordan interrupted, "tell me, how do you prepare for a decisive shot in the final seconds of an important game?" The question caught Curry off guard, causing him to step away from the ball. "Well, first I take a deep breath. I visualize the ball going through the net. I eliminate all external thoughts and—" "No," Jordan interrupted. "Don't tell me what you think you should do. Tell me what you actually do." Curry reflected for a moment, realizing he had answered with the polished version he usually offered in interviews. Actually, he started again, more honestly, I try to control everything, every variable. My breathing, my balance, the exact position of my fingers on the ball, the angle of my elbow. It's as if I'm trying to calculate every physical aspect to eliminate any possibility of error. Jordan smiled, as if Curry had finally arrived at the point he expected. And in golf? The same, admitted Curry. Maybe even more intense. I check the wind, the slope, the distance, my stance. Sometimes it feels like I'm solving a complex equation before each shot. Now, try another approach, suggested Jordan. Step away from the ball for a moment. Curry obeyed, curious. Control is an illusion, Steph, said Jordan, his voice taking on an almost philosophical tone. Not just in sports, but in life. We believe we can control the outcome if we just execute each movement with absolute perfection. He paused, letting the words sink in. But the real secret isn't maximizing control. It's finding the perfect balance between effort and surrender. Curry looked at Jordan, intrigued by the direction the conversation had taken. Step back to the ball, Jordan instructed. But this time, don't try to hit the hole. So what should I do? Just make the most natural movement possible. Don't think about technique. Don't think about the outcome. Just connect with the swing your body already knows. Curry returned to position, trying to put aside years of technical analysis and perfectionism. He took a deep breath and executed the putt almost instinctively, without the usual meticulous adjustments. The ball rolled smoothly across the green, following a slightly different line than he would have consciously planned. To his surprise, it fell directly into the hole. See? Jordan smiled. There's a difference between preparation and obsession, between respecting the process and becoming a slave to it. Jordan retrieved the ball from the hole and positioned it at another point on the green. He executed another perfect putt before continuing. You know why golf became so important to me after basketball? Because it taught me something I never fully learned on the courts. What? To accept imperfection. Jordan looked at the horizon, as if contemplating something beyond the course before them. In basketball, I could compensate for a mistake with athleticism, with intensity, with pure willpower. In golf, no. Every error has consequences. Every negative thought manifests in the swing. Jordan offered the putter to Curry again. The swing is a mirror, Steph. It doesn't lie. It reveals exactly who you are in that moment. Your patience, your insecurities, your doubts, your confidence. He made a significant pause. Just like your shot. Curry accepted the club, letting the words sink in. There was a profound truth there that resonated with his own experience. For years, Jordan continued, I fought the golf course like I fought opponents in basketball, trying to dominate it, conquer it, bend it to my will. A melancholic smile crossed his face. It took me a long time to realize that the real opponent was myself. Curry executed another putt, this time allowing the movement to flow naturally, without the usual meticulous analysis. The ball rolled smoothly, stopping a few centimeters from the hole. Almost, he commented, a touch of frustration in his voice. And that's perfectly acceptable, Jordan responded with a serenity that surprised Curry. Golf taught me to accept the almost, to recognize that not everything is under my control, no matter how hard I try. Curry reflected on those words, relating them to his own journey. How many nights had he spent mentally reviewing every missed shot, every imprecise pass, every detail of his game that could be perfected. "Do you think I try to control too much?" he finally asked. Jordan studied him for a moment before answering, "I see in you the same thing I saw in myself. A perfectionist who believes he can bend the universe to his will through pure discipline and hard work." He paused, walking across the green until he was next to Curry. "And that's taken you far, just like it took me. But there comes a point where excessive control becomes the very obstacle." "How so?" "Think about your three-point shot," Jordan explained. "When you're at your peak, in perfect flow, you're not consciously calculating every variable, are you? You're not thinking about mechanics, elbow angle, finger rotation." "No," admitted Curry. "In those moments, it's almost automatic, as if the body knows exactly what to do without the mind's interference." "Exactly," nodded Jordan. "Great moments don't come from perfect control. They come from perfect trust, from the ability to let go, to trust the work you've already done, to allow your body to do what it's been trained to do." Curry executed one more putt, this time consciously trying to find the balance Jordan described. Neither obsessive control nor complete abandonment, but a harmonious middle ground. The ball traveled the path with an almost hypnotic elegance, falling smoothly into the hole. "There it is," said Jordan with approval. "You felt the difference?" "Yes," responded Curry, surprised by the clarity of the experience. "It was like trusting instead of forcing." "That's the secret golf taught me too late to apply to basketball," revealed Jordan. "That true mastery isn't in absolute control, but in the harmony between effort and surrender, between doing and letting happen." Both fell silent for a moment, contemplating the green that shone under the moonlight. What had begun as a simple walk to a putting green had transformed into something much deeper, a living metaphor for the inner struggles they both faced, for the delicate balance between the discipline that made them great and the flexibility that could set them free. "Amit Satwidr, strange," Curry finally reflected. "I've spent so much time trying to control every aspect of my game, every aspect of my image, every aspect of my life. And maybe, in doing so, I've lost something essential along the way, some freedom, some fundamental joy in the process." Jordan smiled, not the competitive, predatory smile the world knew, but a gentle, almost paternal smile. "That," he said, retrieving the putter from Curry's hand, "might be the most valuable lesson the game has to teach. And it comes not when we're at the top, but when we start to glimpse the descent down the other side of the mountain." They left the putting green side by side, walking unhurriedly as the night advanced over whistling straits. The course's automatic lights now shone more intensely against the sky that had darkened completely, creating a dramatic contrast of shadow and light where they passed. In the distance, the lights of the clubhouse twinkled like a distant beacon, reminding them that the world beyond that moment still existed, even if it seemed temporarily suspended. They followed an elevated path that offered a panoramic view of the course and the lake. The breeze had intensified slightly, bringing with it the characteristic aroma of fresh water mixed with the scent of freshly cut grass. For a few moments, they walked in silence, each absorbing the lessons of the putting green in their own way. "Have you ever wondered?" Jordan suddenly broke the silence, his voice carrying a contemplative tone that wasn't there before. "Who you would be if this all ended tomorrow?" Curry looked at him, intrigued by the question. "If basketball, fame, contracts, cameras, everything disappeared," continued Jordan, gesturing broadly to the horizon, "who is Steph Curry when no one is watching?" The question hung between them, heavy and insistent. It wasn't the kind of question that could be answered quickly or superficially. It was the kind of interrogation that penetrated layers of carefully constructed identity over years. Curry didn't respond immediately. His steps slowed as his gaze was lost on the dark horizon where the lake met the sky. Jordan didn't press, allowing the silence to do its work, opening space for reflections that rarely had permission to emerge in the accelerated life of an elite athlete. Honestly, Curry finally spoke, his voice softer than before. I don't know if I have a clear answer for that. It's scary to think like that. Jordan nodded, understanding. Most of us don't. They arrived at a stone bench strategically positioned overlooking the course. By silent mutual agreement, they sat side by side, their gazes fixed on the horizon as the conversation entered even deeper territory. When I retired for the first time, Jordan continued, in 1993, after my father passed away, it was like someone had pulled the rug out from under my feet. Not just because of the loss, which was devastating, but because, suddenly, the Michael Jordan the world knew was on pause, and I found myself face to face with the person who existed behind that name. Curry watched Jordan's profile closely against the night sky, aware of the rare privilege of witnessing this vulnerability. "And who was there?" he asked gently. A melancholic smile appeared on Jordan's face. A man with many more questions than answers. Someone who had spent so much time being defined by his ability to put a ball through a hoop that he had forgotten how to define himself by anything else. That confession, so distant from the image of the relentless, unshakable Jordan that dominated the public imagination, created a safe space for Curry to explore his own vulnerabilities. "Sometimes I have nightmares," confessed Curry, looking at his own hands. "Not about losing games or missing shots. I dream that I wake up and no one knows who I am. That everything I've built simply evaporated. And in the dream, I feel as much panic as relief." Jordan nodded slowly, his gaze revealing deep recognition. "The panic I understand," he responded. "But the relief?" Curry took a deep breath before continuing. "Relief because maybe finally I could find out who I really am when I'm not being Steph Curry." A distant owl hooted, its call echoing through the silent course like a nature's commentary on the depth of the conversation. "You know what no one prepares you to deal with?" Jordan asked, his gaze now fixed on some invisible point ahead. "The silence after it all ends. When the cheers stop. When the contracts end. When the lights go out and the cameras go away." Curry could feel the weight of those words, not as an abstract concept, but as an inevitable reality that would one day be his as well. "How did you handle that?" he asked. "Badly at first," admitted Jordan with surprising honesty. "I tried to fill the void with other things. Golf, business, the brief return to baseball. Anything to avoid facing the most uncomfortable question of all. Which one? If I'm no longer Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player of all time, then who the hell am I?" The silence that followed had an almost tangible quality, dense with unspoken meaning, with fears rarely admitted out loud. "My dad used to say," Curry finally broke the silence, "that a man isn't defined by what he does, but by who he is when he's doing nothing." Jordan smiled. "Dell has always been a wise man. But it's easier to say than to live it," continued Curry, "especially when the world insists on defining you by one single thing you do exceptionally well." "That's why we need to ask this question while we're still playing," responded Jordan, turning to face Curry directly. Because if you wait until it's all over to start seeking the answer, the vacuum can swallow you. A stronger gust of wind swept across the course, causing both to instinctively huddle a little. The temperature had dropped, and the first drops of dew were beginning to form on the grass around them. "Who do you love when no one is watching, Steph?" Jordan asked abruptly, his voice softer. The question caught Curry off guard. It wasn't about basketball, contracts, or legacy. It was much more fundamental. "My family," he responded almost instinctively. "Isha, the kids." "No," Jordan gently interrupted. "That's who you love when everyone is watching, too. It's easy. It's expected. I'm asking about the things you value that the world doesn't. See, that maybe doesn't even know exist." Curry reflected deeply, feeling the weight of the question. "I love moments of complete silence," he finally said, as if discovering this as he spoke. "Those rare instances when I'm not a father, husband, player, brand, when I'm just present." Something in Jordan's gaze softened. "I love the sunrise," continued Curry, now more confident in his answer. "Not for motivation or to train early, but simply for the daily miracle that it is. I love studying things that have absolutely nothing to do with basketball. Astronomy, ancient history, things no one would ever associate me with." Jordan listened attentively, his face revealing silent approval. "And honestly," Curry added, almost in a whisper, "sometimes I love simply not being extraordinary. Doing things at which I'm completely mediocre, with no pressure to be the best." A genuine smile formed on Jordan's face. "Now we're getting somewhere." "And you?" Curry returned the key question. "Who is Michael Jordan when no one is watching?" For a moment, it seemed Jordan wouldn't answer. His gaze was lost again on the horizon, as if he were pondering how much of his true essence he was willing to reveal. "I'm someone who still struggles to answer that question," he finally admitted. "Someone who took too long to understand that there's life beyond competition." He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. "But I've discovered some things along the way that I love. Simplicity. A sunrise on a farm in North Carolina is worth more to me now than any champion trophy. That my children's laughter fills me in a way that no crowd's cheers ever could." There was a vulnerability in his voice that completely contradicted his public image. And that, ironically, after a lifetime of being the center of attention. Jordan let out a sigh before continuing, "There's a profound peace in being just an anonymous man fishing on a quiet lake where no one knows your name or cares how many points you've scored." That confession, so human, so contrary to the narrative of the ultra-competitive Jordan who never turned off, created an even deeper connection between the two men. What if the world stopped tomorrow, Steph? If there were no more games to play, records to break, contracts to sign? Jordan fixed his gaze on Curry's. What would be left that truly matters? The question hovered between them like a challenge, not only intellectual, but existential. "The people," Curry responded after a long pause. "The real connections, the moments that don't fit into a statistic or a highlight reel." "Exactly," Jordan nodded. "In the end, it's not the points, the titles, or even the money. It's the moments of true human connection. The people who will still be there when the lights go out and everyone goes home." Both allowed that fundamental truth to permeate the silence that followed. It wasn't a new realization, but it carried a different weight when shared. Between two men who had lived under the most intense of spotlights, who knew the hidden cost of greatness as few could. As night advanced over whistling straits, two of the greatest basketball players of their respective generations remained seated side by side, no longer as icons or competitors, but simply as men facing the same fundamental questions about identity and meaning that define the human journey, far beyond the lines of any court. The temperature had dropped even further, and the Wisconsin night sky now shone with a stunning clarity. Thousands of stars twinkled against the dark mantle, creating a celestial spectacle rarely seen in the illuminated cities, where both spent most of their lives. "We should head back," Jordan said finally, rising from the bench. "It's getting late." Curry nodded and stood as well. Together, they began to traverse the path that would take them back to the main clubhouse area. Unlike the initial walk, when the silence had been laden with expectation and a certain tension, they now walked with the tranquility of men who had shared rarely verbalized truths. "You know, Steph," Jordan began, his voice taking on a reflective tone, "one of the hardest things I faced wasn't winning championships. It was learning to let them go." The path ahead of them gently serpentined between subtle elevations of the course, illuminated only by the low lights that outlined the trails and the silvery glow of the nearly full moon. "The first time I retired in '93, I wasn't really ready," Jordan continued. "It was a combination of exhaustion, grief over my father, and maybe a need to prove I could be more than just a basketball player." Curry listened intently as they walked side by side, their steps in almost perfect synchronization. "When I came back in '95, it was like reclaiming something I felt still belonged to me, that the game was still mine, that I still had things to prove." A wistful smile appeared on Jordan's face. "And it worked, didn't it? 3 more titles, the second three-peat." "The greatest comeback story in sports," Curry commented. "Maybe," Jordan replied with a surprising modesty. "But what few understand is that comeback, as triumphant as it was, didn't resolve the fundamental issue." "Which was?" "Learning to let go." Jordan paused momentarily, gazing up at the starry sky. "Because eventually, we all have to pass the torch, Steph. No matter how great you are, how dominant, how revolutionary, the game goes on without you." There was a raw vulnerability in that admission that made Curry realize, perhaps for the first time fully, the humanity behind the legend. "In '98, when I walked away again, I thought I'd made peace with it," Jordan continued as they resumed their walk. The shot over Russell to seal the 6th title. It seemed like the perfect ending, didn't it? The script Hollywood would write. "It's how everyone remembers it," Curry agreed. But internally, there was still that itch, that doubt. "Can I still do it? What if I tried one more time?" Jordan shook his head slightly, as if he were conversing with himself as much as with Curry. "That's why I came back with the Wizards. Not for the money, not for the fame, but because I still hadn't really learned the most important lesson." "Letting go," Curry completed. "Exactly." Jordan nodded. "And ironically, it was those years in Washington, the ones many consider a blemish on my legacy, that finally taught me what 6 rings couldn't." They arrived at a small bridge that crossed an ornamental stream, part of the meticulous landscaping design of the course. Jordan stopped in the center of the bridge, leaning on the wooden railing and looking down at the water that reflected fragments of the starry sky. "With the Wizards, for the first time, I had to face athletic mortality head-on," he said, his voice now lower, almost confessional. "I wasn't the old Michael anymore. The body didn't respond like it used to. The knees protested. The explosion was diminished. Curry remained silent, respecting the depth of the reflection Jordan was sharing. "And you know what was the hardest part?" Jordan continued. "It wasn't the losses. It wasn't seeing younger players pass me by. It was realizing that the identity I had built my entire life around, the unstoppable, invincible, transcendent Michael, was fading before my eyes." The stream below them murmured softly, providing a natural soundtrack to that moment of shared vulnerability. "Those years taught me something I wish I had learned earlier," Jordan said, turning to face Curry directly. "That you only truly win when you learn to lose without breaking. When you understand that your essence, your worth, isn't tied to the cheers, the records, or even the wins." Those words struck Curry deeply. At 33, still at the peak of his career, the notion of the inevitable descent down the other side of the mountain was something he preferred to keep at a distance. But here was Michael Jordan, the very symbol of athletic excellence, talking about acceptance, surrender, and the wisdom of recognizing when it's time to pass the torch. "How did you know when you were truly ready to let go?" Curry asked. "After the Wizards, I mean." Jordan pondered for a moment before answering, his features illuminated by the moonlight. It wasn't a specific moment. It was a gradual acceptance, like the tide slowly rising on the shore. He paused, searching for the right words. "I realized I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to the fans, not to the critics, not even to myself. That maybe the final frontier of greatness was actually accepting that the game goes on without you." They left the bridge and continued walking. The path now started to climb slightly, taking them back in the direction of the distant clubhouse, whose lights twinkled like a beacon in the darkness. "I have something to show you," Jordan said suddenly, veering off the main path onto a small grassy area that offered another view of the course. Curry followed, intrigued. Jordan removed from his pocket a small object wrapped in a black velvet cloth. With an almost reverential care, he unrolled the fabric, revealing a golf tool Curry didn't immediately recognize. "This is a divot repair," Jordan explained, holding up the small metallic instrument that shone in the moonlight. "For fixing the marks balls leave on the green." T was an elegant object in its simplicity, made of polished stainless steel, with a classic, understated design. It wasn't flashy or attention-seeking, but it had a timeless quality that suggested meaning beyond its practical function. "It was a gift from my father," Jordan continued, his voice noticeably softening. "The last time we golfed together, a few weeks before he passed." Curry remained silent, aware of the emotional weight of the moment. "He told me something that day that I only fully understood years later," Jordan went on, turning the small tool between his fingers. "Michael," he said, "the true character of a golfer isn't revealed by the birdies he makes, but by how he fixes the course for those who come after." Jordan looked at Curry, his eyes reflecting a complex mixture of emotions. "At the time, I thought it was just a lesson in golf etiquette," he said with a wistful smile. "It was only years later that I realized he was talking about so much more than that." Curry nodded slowly, grasping the depth of the metaphor. "I've carried this with me to every golf course since," Jordan continued, still holding the divot repair as if it were a precious relic. "It's a reminder that our passage is temporary, that the course will be here long after we've played our last round." Then, with a deliberate motion that caught Curry completely off guard, Jordan extended his hand and offered the tool. "I want you to have this." Curry looked at Jordan, stunned. I can't accept this," It's a memory of your father. That's exactly why I want you to have it, Jordan insisted, his voice firm but gentle. Some lessons are better passed on than kept. With a reverent hesitation, Curry accepted the small metal object, feeling its surprisingly significant weight in the palm of his hand. It wasn't just a golf tool he was receiving, but a symbol laden with meaning, a passing of the torch that transcended words. "I don't know what to say," Curry admitted, genuinely moved by the gesture. "You don't have to say anything," Jordan replied. "Just remember, one day it will be your turn to pass the torch, to fix the course for those who come after. And when that day comes, I hope you find the grace I took so long to discover, that there is beauty and dignity in knowing when it's time to step away, in recognizing that the game never truly belonged to us. We just passed through it for a brief moment." The divot repair glinted in Curry's hand, catching fragments of the moonlight. It was simple in its construction, but profoundly complex in its symbolism. A tangible reminder that even the greatest of careers are, in the end, temporary chapters in a much larger story. "Thank you," Curry said finally, closing his fingers around the object carefully. "Not just for this, but for all of this." He gestured vaguely, indicating the conversation, the course, the shared moment. Jordan merely nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. Dost, the kind of comprehension that didn't need words to be affirmed. Side by side, they returned to the main path and resumed their journey toward the clubhouse, now walking with the contemplative peace of men who had shared truths that transcended the sport that had united them. And under the vast, starry sky of Wisconsin, two of the greatest players basketball had ever known walked in silence, separated by generations but united by a shared understanding of the price and privileges of greatness, and the wisdom that comes with learning. Finally, to pass the torch. The lights of the clubhouse grew as they approached, the elegant structure gradually emerging from the darkness like an illuminated ship arriving at port. The walk had been long, both in distance and in meaning, and the first signs of human activity began to break the almost mystical isolation they had shared over the past hours. A club employee passed them in a golf cart, waving respectfully as he recognized the two stars. Jordan responded with an economical nod. Curry noticed how the simple gesture seemed rehearsed. Not false, but carefully calibrated. The kind of interaction Jordan had perfected over decades under constant scrutiny. "They always find you, eventually," Jordan commented with a slight smile. "No matter how far you go on the course." The comment carried multiple layers of meaning that didn't escape Curry. In his pocket, his fingers periodically touched the divot repair, as if to confirm that the object and everything it symbolized was real. They arrived at a fork in the path. To the left, the trail led directly to the main clubhouse, where a few cars still waited in the illuminated parking lot. To the right, a more discreet path led to a side area where several luxury vehicles were parked, strategically positioned to allow for discreet departures. "My driver is waiting over there," Jordan said, indicating the right direction. "And I imagine you have people waiting for you at the May Hotel." Curry nodded, probably wondering where I've been for hours. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but laden with the weight of a conversation coming to an end. Both seemed reluctant to break the bubble they had created, that rare space where masks had been temporarily removed and rarely verbalized truths had found expression. "You know," Jordan said finally, his voice low, for Curry's ears only, "conversations like this, they mean more to me now than any win ever did." Something in the simplicity of that confession touched Curry deeply. Here was Michael Jordan, the relentless competitor, the man whose will to win had become legendary, acknowledging that genuine human connections outweighed even the sweetest of triumphs. "Thank you," Curry said, feeling the inadequacy of the words to express the depth of his gratitude. "For all of this. For your time, your stories, your honesty." Jordan studied him for a moment, as if assessing something beyond the spoken words. "Don't thank me yet," he replied with an enigmatic smile. "A lot of these things will only make full sense years down the line. Sometimes the most important seeds we plant are the ones that take the longest to sprout." It was time. They both knew it. The world, with its demands, expectations, and complications, waited beyond this shared moment. Jordan extended his hand. It wasn't the mechanical professional gesture from when they'd met hours before, but something far more meaningful. Curry accepted, feeling the firmness of that hand that had raised 6 championship trophies. "Steph," Jordan said, using his full name for the first time that night, "be kind to yourself on the way down. The mountain doesn't become any less impressive when you start descending the other side." Before Curry could respond, Jordan added, "And remember to fix the divots for those who come after." With one last nod, a gesture that contained more meaning than 1,000 words could express, Jordan walked away down the right path, his silhouette gradually diminishing against the distant lights until it finally disappeared into the darkness. Curry remained still for a few moments, absorbing what had transpired, feeling the weight of the divot repair in his pocket, like a tangible anchor to an experience that already began to seem almost surreal. Finally, he turned and followed the path that led to the main parking lot. A hotel driver waited patiently, asking no questions about where he had been or with whom. The ride back would be short, less than 15 minutes, but Curry knew instinctively that they would be 15 minutes of reflection that would alter the trajectory of his life. As the car glided silently along the dark road that skirted Lake Michigan, Curry stared out the window, not really seeing the scenery, but deeply immersed in his thoughts. He mentally retraced the moments shared on the course, the initial silence, the confessions about emptiness after victories, the admissions of loneliness at the peak, the lessons of control on the putting green, the profound questions about identity, and finally, the symbolic gesture of the divot repair. He took out the small metal tool from his pocket, watching it glint under the occasional lights that passed by. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, appropriately, Curry thought, considering the weight of the lessons it carried. "Everything all right, sir?" the driver asked, noticing his silent contemplation through the rear-view mirror. "Yes," Curry responded automatically, tucking the object away again. "Just thinking." The car continued its journey, skirting the shore of the now invisible lake in the darkness. The stars seemed even brighter here, away from the lights of the club, like silent witnesses to a transformation in progress. One phrase of Jordan's echoed repeatedly in his mind. "You only truly win when you learn to lose without breaking." The wisdom contained in those words went against everything the sports world celebrated, against the win-at-all-costs narrative that had shaped generations of athletes. The hotel appeared on the horizon, its warm lights promising the familiar comfort of his suite, where unanswered messages, urgent emails, and the demands of his normal life awaited. But Curry felt no rush. Something fundamental had shifted within him, a subtle but profound change, like the tectonic movement that eventually alters entire continents. As the car stopped at the hotel entrance, Curry asked the driver to wait a moment. Instead of entering immediately, he walked to a small grassy area adjacent to the parking lot from where he could perfectly see the Wisconsin night sky in all its glory. The Milky Way stretched magnificently above, a spill of diamonds on black velvet. There, under that vast sky, with Jordan's divot repair safe in his pocket, Curry had his epiphany, clear, crystalline, and transformative in its simplicity. "Maybe it's not about winning," he murmured to himself, the words coming out like an exhalation in the cold night air. "Maybe it's about lasting." The understanding expanded within him like waves on a lake. To endure not just in the sense of physical longevity or statistics in a record book, but to endure as a presence, as a positive influence, as someone who left the field better than he found it. To endure in the lives he touched, in the doors he opened for others, in the example he set beyond the achievements. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket, probably his wife, Isha, asking where he was. But for one moment more, Curry remained motionless under the starry sky, savoring this newfound clarity before the demands of the world enveloped him again. He knew he would return to the courts with the same passion, the same relentless work ethic, the same drive for excellence that had always defined him. He would shoot with the same precision, command the team with the same vision, compete with the same inner fire. But something fundamental had shifted in the foundation upon which all of this would be built. A different peace enveloped him now, not the fleeting satisfaction of a win or the transient euphoria of a record, but something more sustainable, more true, an understanding that his journey was simultaneously deeply personal and part of something much larger than himself. Finally, he breathed deep the cold Wisconsin air, as if wanting to internalize this moment, this understanding, this feeling of clarity. He turned and walked back towards the hotel, his steps lighter despite the physical fatigue. Tomorrow, he would be Steph Curry again, the basketball star, the face of a franchise, the three-point shooting revolutionary. But he would carry with him something new, the wisdom of a shared legacy, passed on not through headlines or statistics, but in a quiet conversation on a golf course, under a star-filled sky, between two men who understood the true price and meaning of greatness. And in the years that would follow, through the triumphs and defeats, cheers and criticisms, highs and lows that would inevitably come, Curry would often touch that divot repair, remembering not just the man who had given it, but the fundamental truth it represented. That in the end, when the noise fades and the lights dim, what remains are not the points we scored or the trophies we hoisted, but how we chose to repair the field for those who will come after us.